Cognitive models of aggression begin with something the textbook refers to as a cognitive scripts model. And the way I explain this is kind of follow on textbook. Says that social and aggressive behavior are controlled by cognitive scripts learned and memorized through daily experiences. In other words, as we go through life, these scripts suggest what's going to happen to us in the environment. So we kind of have in here in this wonderful little processing computer we kind of have some expectations for the stuff that's going to happen to us in our lives, and then attached to those possibilities of events, we have kind of a response, almost a pre-planned response. And then we have almost like a likely outcome. It's almost like we have, I don't want to say almost like, but I'm just going to try to illustrate. It would be like having a card, a bunch of cue cards up in here. And on the front of each cue card was an event, something that might happen to us. And we can imagine all sorts of things that might happen to us throughout the day. And then on the back of the card would be a list of possible responses and what the likely outcome for each of those responses are. And so that as those events come up through the day, we already know this is coming, and so we have our pre-programmed list of responses, our pre-planned, here's how we're going to respond if such and such happens to us, here's what might happen, and we pick one of our responses based on the likely outcomes. We develop our scripts both through direct experience and observation. As we experience events for the first time, we add them to our card catalog. So the first time you get in a really long line at the Walmart, you start a new card. Long line at Walmart. Back possible responses. I play on my phone, whatever. What happens. Sometimes we learn through observation. We see something happen to another person. The professor puts on his syllabus, don't use cell phones in my class. You see the kid at the row next to you playing on his cell phone in class. The professor comes down on him and throws him out of class. And you go, okay, event. Using cell phone and pissing off professor, using cell phone class, okay, responses, ignoring professor, likely outcome, failure. Okay, we'll find a new response for that. But it's important to know that once while our pre-planned responses to events are unique to each individual, once the individual learns how they believe they ought to respond in a given incident, they are quite resistant to change. Once we've got our subconscious plan in place, we tend not to change it, especially if our solutions work for us. That's why it's kind of hard for a lot of people. Maybe it's kind of hard why a lot of people to think outside the box. If every time a certain thing happens, we know we respond in a given way and then things work out well, then every time that thing happens, that's what we're going to do. But when the reaction falls outside of our expectations, we have a hard time learning new reactions. People with poorly integrated internal standards against aggression, or individuals who are convinced that aggressive behavior is a good way of life, are likely to incorporate aggressive scripts for behavior. And so they build, on the back of their cue card, when the front of the little cue card says the event is somebody cuts you off in traffic, and they're one of these poorly integrated internal standards people. They don't integrate social norms very well. And the back of their card says, how do I react to this? Well, my reaction is to give them the universal peace sign and honk my horn which is aggressive. I say, okay. And they have a hard time getting beyond that reaction. Another cognitive model would be the hostile attribution bias. This states that youth prone towards violence are more likely to interpret ambiguous, uncertain actions as hostile or threatening. In other words, individuals that are predisposed towards violence, biologically, psychologically predisposed, what have you, when something happens that's unusual or unfamiliar to them, or the interaction with another person, the meaning behind it is unclear. When you go into those situations where you're not sure what the other person means, or what they're thinking, or what their reason for coming up to you is, people that are prone towards violence tend to assume, interpret that as being hostile or threatening. In other words, if the individual is violent by nature, they just kind of assume that other people are too. Violent youth tend to define social problems in a hostile manner. They tend to adopt hostile goals. And then they generate few alternatives to aggression and give higher priority to hostile responses. This seems to be significantly related, by research has found, was significantly related to peer rejection or exposure to family abuse and maltreatment. These things also seem to predispose you towards this hostile attribution bias. And the thing I would like to end with, I think I'm ending with, I think we're going to have not very many, you get a short week on videos, I guess. What I would like to end with is some correlates of violence, or things, characteristics, factors, stimuli, what have you, that have, through research, been found to have some relationship with violence. And the first thing I want to talk about is gender, and your textbook does a decent job of talking about it. Let me just hit some highlights when we talk about gender differences in aggression. And there are differences between men, women, males and females, boys and girls when it comes to violence and aggression. In that males engage in more overt aggression, and they're more directly confrontational, and it's simply a matter of the way we're socialized. Boys are, for the longest time, and maybe society's changing, but the way things still are today, boys are socialized to be more overt in aggression. We tend to react. We're not sneaky. When we get mad at someone, we tend to let them know. Girls, on the other hand, are less overt. They're more covert in their aggression. Remember, aggression does not always equal violence. But that does not mean that females are less aggressive than men. They're just more covert about it. Gender differences exist in the types of aggression. Again, differences are based on socialization, as boys are socialized to be more overt in their aggression, while girls are more commonly socialized in the covert aggression. We raise girls to be sneakier than men. That's why we need you. Girls are much more likely than boys to resort to relational aggression, such as abandoning one friend for another, or spreading malicious gossip, or ridiculing the physical traits of another. It's just the way we are. And it's not biological, and it's not psychological. It is socialization. The next correlate I'd like to talk about is poverty. Just a couple of things I want to mention about poverty. First is the fact that some people argue that, particularly conflict theorists, argue that economic inequality in certain neighborhoods, certain areas, tend to create tension and frustration, and which can result in aggression or violence. However, relative measures of economic success, in other words, how well people are compared to other people, seem to be better indicators of violence than absolute measures of economic success. In other words, If you're poor, if you don't have a great job, but everybody around you is also poor and doesn't have a very good job, then aggression, violence is less likely to occur, and it's hard to draw a relation to it. Um, However, if you and your immediate circle of friends, you're all poor and got crappy jobs, but them people over there on the other side of the railroad tracks, they got the good jobs, and they got the nice houses, and they got the nice cars, and you work harder than they do. You work in the factory, and they sit on their butt all day. That, on the other hand, may have some relationship, and much more likely have some relationship with aggressive emotions. And then a conflict theorist would say eventually that would result in violence. Okay. Next correlate we'll talk about is witnessing violence. Now, not just talking about observing it in the home, but witnessing violence, period. Witnessing violence cannot be the sole or the only cause of violent behavior. But witnessing violence during childhood may result in social learning of violent responses to frustration and anger. Some have suggested that corporal punishment is related to violence, but the reality is reaction. Research has been mixed. Researchers are not clear on whether or not corporal punishment really predisposes an individual towards violence. Bullying, another correlate of violence. Bullying is much like other types of other than just regular violence. Bullying is an expression of a behavioral manifestation of aggressive feelings, and a correlation between bullying and violence is obvious. Bullying is aggression at its simplest. Remember, bullying can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be psychological. Aggression, likewise, is both physical, verbal. Doesn't necessarily have to be violence. But an interesting result of the research into bullying has shown that anti-bullying programs don't just reduce bullying, but tend to reduce aggression in general and violence. And so, anti-bullying programs may have some benefit beyond just reducing bullying. Let's see, what else to talk about? Subculture of violence. Just briefly, we mentioned that residents in certain neighborhoods or areas may develop norms different from the larger society that support aggression or violence. And so what I'm trying to say is that there are, when we talk about social norms, there's social norms that apply to American society at whole. But within American society, there are many groups, and all those groups have their own social norms. In a geographic area, say a low-income area, you may have a case where the social norm is more towards aggression or violence as a way to get things done. And so you may have violence, aggression being part of the social norm, probably being part of the culture of an area. Let's see. Lastly, what about the media? Does the media cause or contribute to violence? Well, probably. The endless GOP debates. Eventually you just want to throw something at the TV. That's aggression. Sorry, just kidding. The reality is, because since the first time Elvis shook his pelvis, people have been trying to say that popular media, music, TV, movies, video games, they make kids violent. And so, try as social scientists. We say, hey, it's something to study. It's a possibility for a publication. Let's study this thing. And so there have been lots of attempts to try to study the effect of violent media on children, in particular children. Things like the Bobo doll study. Look it up on, not Wikipedia, but look it up on some reputable source. Look up the Bobo doll study. I think you'll be amused. The problem is there are some ethical concerns with studying the effects of violent media on children. Serious ethical concerns. But we've tried to look at, observationally, look at the effects of violent media. And the reality is, we're not sure. It comes down to is, you ask a social scientist, some will say, oh yeah, and some will say no, and the really honest ones will say, we don't know. The reality is we're not sure. It's really difficult to test. Some suggest that media depictions of violence represent a symbolic representation that could add to social learning. And so there's an idea that we learn to react violently to aggression and violence through violent forms of media. Others suggest that aggression is primarily a biological drive that requires expression, and media violence provides an outlet, provides a catharsis, to put it in a Freudian term. Provides us with a release for aggressive drives, like going to the boxing match or the football game. And so there's arguments on both sides that say violent media is bad, violent media is okay because it allows us to blow off steam. Research, I got little success at finding solid support either way. Maybe some research someday will come up with a definitive answer. I doubt it. This may be one of those issues that no matter how long we research it may go either way. Okay, that's it for this week. Aren't you happy? Only 3 videos. Of course, a couple of them are longer than normal. I hope they render well. Hope you're making good progress in your term papers. Really need to be heavily into taking notes by now. If you haven't finished collecting sources by this week, you are behind. If you have already sent me a draft, and at least one of you has, I'm trying to get to that. We'll get it back to you as soon as I can. But yeah, if you're not heavily into taking notes from your sources by now, you are behind, and you need to seriously think about getting caught up. Do remember that your midterm exam is next week. There'll still be discussion forum as normal, still be video lectures, but do keep in mind that the midterm is next week. Keep in mind you have all week to work on it. Biggest advice I can give you about this midterm is take the allotted time. There's a reason I'm giving you this much time to work on it. Think about it. If the professor is giving you a whole week to work on an exam and knows that you're going to have access to your textbook and your notes and the video lectures during the exam, what do you think my expectation of your responses are? Knowing that you have access to all that material while you're taking the exam and you got a week to take it. This is the unintended consequence of me not putting a time limit on the exams. So, good luck next week. I'll talk to you next week about, at the moment I forget what I'm going to talk to you about next week. But enjoy the discussions. Y'all been doing a real good job. I've enjoyed those. So that's it.